to this installment of the Good Old Days audio collection. This is Tate, editor of Good Old Days magazine, and your host for this look back to those days gone by. In this special collection of memories, we'll remember the fun and challenge of winter days gone by. Come back with me and share these memories of the time we know affectionately as the Good Old Days. Everyone has heard about the 3 R's of education, but have you heard of the 3 S's of wintertime fun? Lila Kint takes us back to Colorado of the 1920s and 1930s as she remembers the 3 S's.
Right along with learning the 3 R's, an important part of growing up in Colorado's Tomichi Valley in the 1920s and 30s also included learning the 3 S's: skating, skiing, and sledding. Newcomers to the valley soon found out that they either learned the 3 S's or got left out of an awful lot of winter fun. We didn't need lakes on which to skate, professionally groomed slopes for skiing or sledding, nor was it necessary to have fancy equipment to join in the fun. During January, it was not unusual for the thermometer to drop to 35 degrees and 40 degrees below zero at night. This made for solid ice, and what could be more fun than a moonlit skating party on the creek? The boys built a big bonfire on the creek bank, and we sat on a log close to the fire to put on our skates. Shoe skates were an uncommon possession in those Depression years. Most kids had the type that fastened to a person's shoes by twisting the clamps tightly over the shoe soles with a key. Because they were adjustable to several shoe sizes, a pair of these skates lasted a growing child for several winters. Where we skated depended upon which kids up and down the valley had been ambitious enough to scoop the snow off a section of the creek in their meadow. Tag was the favorite game. Next came crack the whip and hockey, which became so rough that the girls dropped out of the game before too long. When we were worn out, we went to the ranch house to drink hot chocolate while our tingling toes vied for front row position by the estate oak heater in the middle of the living room. The skiing we did was quite different from the kind done on the ski slopes today. Shushing, Christies, and even snowplowing were unknown terms to us. We simply climbed to the top of a hill, pointed our skis straight down, and, if we made it that far, coasted to a stop in a long meadow at the bottom. Our skis were wooden ones with a leather strap that went over the toe. After numerous instances of standing at the top of the hill with one foot stuck in the strap of one ski and watching the other ski sail to the bottom of the hill, someone came up with the idea of a makeshift binding. We cut pieces of inner tube crosswise, put those big bands over our feet, thrusting our toes under the strap, then pulled the band down over our toes. It wasn't infallible, but many times it saved climbing the hill twice to get to ride down once. The big hill southeast of the schoolhouse was the most popular place for sledding. The sledding trail was on the steepest slope of the hill, and 2/3 of the way down it crossed an irrigation ditch. Boards were laid across the ditch and covered with snow. As we zoomed across, we found ourselves suddenly airborne for several feet, and when the runners hit the trail again, we knew we had better be hanging on for dear life. Those who came bellybuster style oofed loudly at the ditch. If you happened to be one of those who didn't own a sled, a piece of cardboard, a snow scoop, or a bit of tin worked just as good. I'll never understand why none of us ever thought of riding inner tubes, which is so popular today. One year, much to the delight of the kids and the consternation of the parents, we had a young teacher who let us tie our sleds to his car bumper, and he pulled us around and around the block. March afforded the prime sledding time in the valley. As the warm sun in the day started to melt the snow, the cold nights caused a hard crust to form on top, so that even on a very gentle slope, the sleds breezed along at a fast clip. The trick to this kind of sledding was to get out early in the morning, before the sun softened the crust. We all had some pretty spectacular spills by sledding too late into the morning. When a sled broke through the crust, It stopped quite suddenly. The rider didn't. Thinking back on those days, I believe that we looked forward more to winter than to summer. Perhaps it was because our winters were long and we were determined to make the most of them. Whatever the reason, the 3 S's proved to be our most remembered subjects, and we reckoned our years in winters.
I guess we all have special places we remember from our childhood. A secret clubhouse, a favorite climbing tree, a hidden cave. Any place we and our friends could enjoy the delicious fun of being young. Miller's Hill was R.C. Mclntyre's special place, and he remembers the day he wondered, who stole Miller's Hill?
It was a neighborhood landmark. It signaled spring, and it heralded winter. Snow covered its sides during Christmas school vacation, and one wild dogwood bush crowned its top for the spring counterpart. During the winter, sledding was the main attraction. Good sledding weather is cold weather. In eastern Washington, cold weather can be counted on each winter. To offset the coldness, anyone who used the side of Miller's Hill for sledding was expected to add to the bonfire that seemed to glow from November until February, near the top of the slide. Pine cones, tree branches, occasional small pieces of cordwood from a home fuel supply were brought by the potential sledders to fuel the flames. The dogwood bush, being the closest supplier of wood, was almost depleted by the end of winter, but enough of the bush remained to bloom each spring and wave its white petals in the May breeze. Winter was the popular season that attracted kids from blocks away. Somebody always brought a shovel, so fresh snow was constantly applied to those worn places where rocks and soil attempted to peek through. The summer path that became the basis of the winter slide extended at least a block from the top of the hill to a sparsely settled neighborhood street below. In the 1920s and 30s, there were fewer cars than there are today, and in eastern Washington winters, fewer yet. No one had to worry about becoming a casualty or a statistic as he or she sailed down the side of Miller's Hill on a cold winter's day or night. The momentum of the ride carried sled and passenger onto the street and along its flat surface for several feet. I don't recall anyone who ever knew or saw Miller, but fond memories of Miller's Hill remained in my mind for decades. When I returned to my hometown after being gone for 28 years, 40 years from my last visit to the hill, I sought it out. It was not winter, so there was no snow. It was not spring, so there was no dogwood in bloom. In fact, there was no hill. Where the hill had been, the land was as flat as a Midwestern prairie state. Nature, with help from the elements, had decided a hill would rise irregularly from ground level to a 30-foot-high indefinite crown. Modern man, with earth-moving equipment, had decided that the hill should no longer exist. I wondered if Miller knew that someone had disposed of his, or her, hill. I wasn't interested in finding out the reason for the disappearance. Miller's Hill is only a very pleasant memory to someone who, over a half-century ago, experienced its winter magic and its spring fantasy.
Fun in the Northeast in the good old days meant skiing and a trip from the city into a winter wonderland. Elsbeth Tucker remembers the time when she and a friend caught the rails to a skiing adventure in the Snow Train.
It was sometime in the 1930s when a friend and I read in the newspaper, the Boston Herald, that the Boston and Maine Railroad was planning to run a special train on Sundays for those who liked to ski or perhaps just wanted to ride up to see the skiing and the beauty of New Hampshire in the winter. Being in those days young, energetic, and perhaps a little daring, we both decided with some excitement that we would go, in fact, had to go, on this train's first trip up to the snow country. We found out that on this first run, the snow train was leaving North Station in Boston at 9:30 on a Sunday morning and making only one stop. That stop was to be the station at our hometown. We were elated. That Sunday dawned sunny and cold. The train would arrive at exactly 10 in the morning. When we arrived, wearing ski pants, caps, heavy sweaters over wool shirts, and our feet encased in thick white socks, which were stuffed into very heavy, well-oiled ski boots, we were both surprised at the number of cars and people milling around. Everyone seemed to be carrying skis and ski poles over his shoulder, and all were clothed in the same heavy outfits as we were. Excitement ran high. The time drew near for the train to arrive. All of us, no longer strangers it seemed, compared our watches. Many had come from neighboring towns and cities. We all looked up the tracks expectantly as we heard the distant sound of an approaching train. A nervous woman in back of me said, "Wouldn't it be terrible if it didn't stop here?" Trying to ignore the remark, I watched as the black engine drew in with a grinding of brakes and hissing steam. It was exactly 10 o'clock. This was long before the days of smooth-running, air-conditioned budliners. As I remember, there were only 3 or 4 cars back of the large black coal-burning engine. I watched as 2 conductors swung easily off. I could feel then the rush of excitement that passed through the waiting crowd as we all pushed forward, slightly hampered by skis and ski poles. We made it into one of the cars and I found a seat. Everyone seemed to be laughing and happy, more like a crowd at a football game than a group boarding a train. Once seated, I looked around, noticing some relaxed people that apparently had boarded the train in Boston. Then came the problem of what to do with our cumbersome skis and poles. Both of us tried to shove them up on the rack overhead, but failed, so we just sat there, looking young and helpless. That worked. From a few seats ahead of us, 2 young men appeared, offering their help, and easily stored our paraphernalia on the rack above our seat. This done, one of them asked politely, "Do you girls play cards?" For a moment we hesitated. Was it right to play cards with 2 unknown young men? Evidently sensing our indecision, one of the men introduced himself and his friend, saying they both attended Harvard College. We in turn gave our first names, saying we attended different schools in Boston. After a short, pleasant conversation, one of the boys started to turn over the back of the green upholstered seat in front of us. This made a table. Then the seat in front of that was turned over, providing a place for the boys to sit. A deck of cards was produced, and I guess we played bridge, or was it rummy? I was in my early 20s that winter day, and now, living in a rest home, I find my memory not so clear, tending more to be on the foggy side. I remember looking out the window now and then, seeing familiar towns as we rushed by. However, soon we were racing through unknown, snow-covered countryside. Around noon, a white-coated man strolled down the aisle of our car, selling sandwiches. Ham, I think. We all bought 2. He was followed a short time later by one of the conductors, who announced to all in the car that the train would stop first about a half-mile before Intervale, New Hampshire, where if we wished we could get off. There was a good hill nearby for skiing. If we wished, however, we could go on to Intervale, where the train would remain until 4 in the afternoon, leaving time, and be sure you don't miss it. Many of us, lugging our skis and poles, left the train at the first stop. I presume our card-playing friends did too, but we somehow didn't run into them on the ski slopes. Clamping on our skis, we made our way to the bottom of a high hill that the conductor had assured us was good skiing. There were others there with their skis. I glanced up to see a man slowly making his way up this deep, snow-covered hill. He placed first his left ski horizontal or crabwise, followed by the right ski. It looked, and turned out to be, slow, difficult work. Watching him, I thought to myself, if he can do it, so can I. So off I started. The farther up, the steeper became the hill. I must mention that at this date such things as ski lifts, warm ski lodges, or handsome ski instructors were just not in existence. As I climbed foot by foot, my friend had apparently gone elsewhere. I found myself feeling alone in a cold, white world. I did finally reach the top, and for a moment I stood there trying to get my breath. Then I peered cautiously over the edge, seeing the ski track that seemed to drop suddenly into outer space. There were about 5 people standing around as I remarked aloud, "I'll never make it." "Sure you will," I was told by somebody, and then an older man spoke up. "Watch out for that high bump at the bottom." A woman's voice behind me said impatiently, "Come on, get going." Without another thought, a ski pole in each mittened hand, I gave a quick push and found myself flying at great speed down what looked more like the side of a mountain than a mere snow-covered hill. Proudly I found myself thinking as I sailed along, "This isn't too bad." Then glancing up ahead, I saw that the ski trail went suddenly up, to vanish into what seemed to be thin air. No time to think. I bent my body forward, feeling my skis whiz up this jump, for that's what it was. For 1 second I looked down to see far below a small group watching me. But that wasn't all. Seemingly floating through air, I saw one man step forward suddenly. To my horror, I realized that he was focusing a movie camera on me. Quickly I uttered a silent prayer, "Dear Lord, don't let me fall." He must have heard me, for I came down hard on a snow-packed surface, my body dangerously wobbling. With every ounce of my willpower I came to a stop, upright on my skis. Of the train ride back I have little memory. I know there was no card playing. Evidently fresh air and exercise affected us all alike. We slept the entire trip home.
Skiing was okay for the slightly older set, but for kids it was sledding. Victor Caccamise remembers when his flexible flyer was used for chores or just plain fun in The Day of the Sled.
In the old days, on our farm, the sled was an important piece of winter equipment. Besides serving as a pleasure craft for us kids, the sled was used for various chores, such as when our ma used to say to one of the other of us older boys, "Pick up these groceries from the store." Well, fetching these groceries from Ernie Singer's grocery store meant hiking 1.5 miles down the roly-poly snow-covered road. And had it not been for the old flexible flyer sled, I would have been hard put to carry a huge bag of groceries. As it was, however, I'd load the groceries on the sled, and the first hill I'd come to, I'd shove off and coast. Then I'd walk some and coast some more, going on like that all the way home. The round trip usually turned out to be a fun trip as well as a chore. When the snow was hard packed on the gravel road, the sledding would be excellent, and I'd coast swiftly down one hill and halfway up the next. On the other hand, when fluffy light snow had not yet been packed down by passing cutters, bobsleds, and cars, the sledding was poor, and I would do more walking and pulling than coasting. But on the whole, the sled made the chores much easier. Another time that the sled came in mighty handy was when old Bossy had herself a calf and caused a milk shortage in our household, which was a serious situation, since milk was consumed in great quantities by our large family, especially when our ma was busy making bread, butter, cheese, and baked goods too numerous to mention. The way in which our pa handled this situation was quite simple. Before he would leave for his day's work in his city's barber shop, he would firmly attach a box to the sled, insert a 5-gallon milk can into the box, and say to us boys, "See to it that this can is filled with milk from Henry Drake's dairy farm before you boys go to school." So off we would trudge, Sam and I, towing the sled behind us, our buckled overshoes squeaking with each step of the long mile to the Drake farm. For a fair price, our milk can would be filled with rich, fresh milk. The round trip would be easy going or difficult, depending upon the condition of the snow-covered road. If the snow was hard-packed, we'd have smooth sailing, and we'd take turns pulling our precious cargo. On the other hand, if the snow was deep and rutted, the job would require the pulling power of both Sam and me, but we always managed to get back in time for school, and it was always a proud moment when we arrived home with the milk to see the pleased smile on our ma's face. Christmas time always provided an extra chore for the sled. It was Christmas tree time, and that meant searching for just the right tree. Our ma always favored the Scotch pine because it held its needles longer than most evergreens. But the long trek to the high ridge where the best trees grew was not an easy one. Sam and I sometimes, little brother Al, would leave the house bright and early, well bundled up against the elements and towing our sled behind us. We'd take off across snowy fields as the crow flies and head for the ridge, a good 2 miles beyond the flatlands ahead of us. When the snow was hard and crusty and the weather clear, the going was easy, and we'd arrive at the ridge in an hour or so. But sometimes old Mother Nature would kick up her heels, and the going would be rough, as well as hazardous. It was times like these that we wondered if we'd make it. Our Ma's love for those Scotch pines urged us on, and we never failed to come home without one tied to the sled, although once, in a blizzard, we barely made it back, and it took some time to thaw out our frozen noses, ears, and toes. It was worth it to see our Ma's eyes light up when we carried the beautiful tree into the house and set it up in the parlor. Yes, the sled was a pretty important item in our daily lives during the cold northern winters. Before we had a horse to do the hauling, all the cordwood we'd cut with our big 2-man crosscut saw we hauled from the woods to our house by sled. And there again the going was not always easy, especially when the snow piled up. We managed to keep the wood boxes full and a good supply in the woodshed, although one winter back in the 30s, a blizzard such as we'd never hoped to see again came our way. We were on the verge of breaking up apple crates and any other item made of wood in order to keep a fire in the stove. With a little help from God, we'd figured our wood supply just about right to outlast the blizzard. Fun time with our sleds always came after whatever chores sled. Like other boys and girls, we joined in the usual downhill coasting fun, but after a while, mere downhill sledding became a bit too tame. We'd keep an eye on the flooded flatlands out beyond the north slope of our property, and when Mother Nature blew her frigid breath across the water and froze it solid, we would swing into action. We'd rig sails made from whatever cloth remnants our Ma could furnish on our sleds and race across that sea of ice, shouting with sheer joy as we picked up speeds of up to 40 miles an hour. Until we learned to sail against the wind, however, it was a long trek back to the starting point, but we loved every moment of it. Another fun trick was to sneak behind a slow-moving snowplow and hitch a ride with our sleds. Sometimes the 3 of us brothers would ride for miles without detection. Seldom did we ever walk back. There was always another plow coming the other way. Looking back, I can say only that those were indeed the days of the sled.
I don't know which part of a blizzard has more of an effect on a youngster, the fierce, frightening fury of the storm or the startling beauty it leaves behind. Grace Sylvester weighs the 2 extremes of the storm as she recalls the blizzard of '49.
We were in school when the blizzard started. As the day lengthened, the storm grew worse, and the teacher became increasingly nervous. In mid-afternoon, our fathers came to take us home. Dad made my brothers, sisters, and myself form a line, linking hands as we groped the 2 miles home. If we could have cut across country, it would have been only a mile. However, the visibility was so limited, the danger of becoming lost in the open pasture was too great. After what seemed like hours later, we arrived home to a mother distraught with worry. For days the storm raged. The first day or so, my siblings and I played innumerable games of tic-tac-toe, hangman, and various games of cards. We also helped Mom catch up on the many chores involved in maintaining a family of 8 children. After the novelty wore off, the inevitable spats started, and everyone became rather short-tempered. Dad could do little outside other than feed the animals and milk the cows. I think he was grateful for this respite, even though the storm made the most basic of chores seem like a monumental task. Mother would occasionally help him, more to get out of the house and the chaos therein than for altruistic reasons. Finally, one morning we awoke to a new world. A world of white and cold, stark, unadorned white and bone-chilling cold. The vicious storm had transformed the bleak, dry, desolate South Dakota plains into a place of overwhelming beauty. The blizzard had provided a dazzling new cloak for the barren land to wear. Everywhere there was white, pure, glistening, pristine white. Gone were the tumultuous clouds, storm-tossed by the unrelenting winds. The snow had stopped falling. The winds had ceased blowing. The quiet was so total, it was as if the earth had been deserted, its residents off on a journey to outer space, allowing the land to recuperate from the tempest that had disrupted the normal day-to-day routine. We opened the door of the snow-shrouded house and waddled out in our abundance of winter raiment. The vividness of our apparel created a kaleidoscope of color against the white background. We stood in awe of the splendor surrounding us. The sunlight was so brilliant it blinded us. We shielded our eyes, carefully peeping out. It was as if the good fairy had waved her magic wand, sprinkling everything with sequins. The glistening motes wafted through the air, adding their luster to everything they touched. Our imaginations ran rampant. It was a never-never land filled with new and wondrous things. The old barn shimmered. The chickens strutted in their lustrous elegance, preening their feathers carefully as if to retain the ethereal crystals as long as possible. Everywhere we looked was glittering, glowing white. The height of the barn had been extended by the vast mountain of snow atop it. Fences were buried, and boundaries erased by the unyielding fury of the storm. Roads had been obliterated. Hills had formed in a land where hills were a rare sight. These fresh mounds resembled giant prairie dog homes, ideally suited for long, carefree sled rides. Suddenly the air was fractured with our cries. As the sound splintered down through the intense cold, the words became clear. "The school has disappeared," we shouted. "So has the hall." Mom and Dad looked toward the intersection a mile away where the buildings normally stood. The small, compact school where grades 1 through 8 were taught was no more. Gone also was the large hall where the community get-togethers were held. In their place stood one medium-sized hill and one large hill connected by a long sloping bridge. The outdoor privies had vanished completely, perhaps vanquished to Nebraska by the gale-force winds. What a strange world! So alien, so beautiful and vaguely frightening. All at once an eerie mechanical sound clashed with the dreamlike stillness. Around and over the newly created barn mountain came a vehicle, totally foreign to the farming community. It was a square box, covered in the camouflage colors used by the armed services. In lieu of wheel or runners, it climbed over the snow on tracks, not unlike those on army tanks. Inside were 2 National Guardsmen, called to emergency duty to ensure that people in isolated areas without telephone or electricity were home safe and sound. They asked if we needed anything or if anyone required medical attention. Reality had returned and invaded the enchantment left by the fierce winter storm.